3, 2, 1, microphone check.
Testing, testing. No. Testing, testing. 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 No.
How is that, Councillor Warnes? Yep.
It's working, is it? Good evening everyone and welcome to this meeting of the Planning Committee. I'm Councillor Lynn Barton, Deputy Chair of the Planning Committee, and I will be chairing the meeting this evening. To begin the meeting, there are a few matters of housekeeping. Number one, action in the event of an emergency. There are no practice alarms planned for this evening, so if an alarm sounds, please evacuate the Town Hall by going down the main staircase or the back staircase to the High Street and then to the car park behind the Town Hall in St Rumwold Street. This meeting is being live streamed to the Council's YouTube page and will be available after the meeting. Please would speakers use microphones at all times and speak directly into the microphone, and would participants please mute the microphones when not speaking. Right, introductions. Members of the committee and officers will introduce themselves starting from my left.
Martin Warnes, Beerchurch Ward.
Robert Davidson, Mersey and Pyfleet Ward.
Councillor Mike Hogg, St Anne's and St John's wards.
Sam McLean, Newtown and Christchurch.
Jackie McLean, Markstown Lair Ward.
Councillor Tim Young, Greenstead Ward.
Councillor Sue Lissy Moore, Prettygate Ward.
Councillor Sam McCarthy, representing Shrub End Ward.
Good evening, Councillor Paul Dundas, Tiptree Ward, and I am substituting for Councillor Roger Mannion.
Chris Harden, Planning Officer.
John Miles, Planning Officer.
Simon Cairns, Joint Head, Planning.
Robert Carmichael, Democratic Services Officer.
Thank you. Members of the committee may use electronic devices to access their meeting papers, and visitors are welcome to use mobile phones and other devices, including cameras. But please do use them discreetly, set them to silent, and do not use voice or camera flash functions. We will have a break after the completion of items at 7:30 or an appropriate time. There are toilets on every floor in the building and an induction loop in this room. Whilst determination of a planning application is not a quasi-judicial process, unlike certain licensing functions carried out by the local authority, it is a formal administrative process involving the application of national and local policies, reference to legislation and case law, as well as rules of procedure, rights of appeal, and an expectation that people will act reasonably and fairly. All involved in these decisions should remember the possibility that an aggrieved party may seek a judicial review and/or complain to the Ombudsman on grounds of maladministration or a breach of the authority's code. Item 2, substitutes this evening. Councillor Dundas for Councillor Mannion, as mentioned. Councillor Tim Young for Councillor Lilly, and Councillor Lissamore for Councillor Tate. Item 3, urgent items. We have no urgent items. Item 4, declarations of interest. Have any councillors any declarations this evening? No? Okay, so no declarations of interest. Item 5, have your say. If anyone has a petition they wish to present to me on any of the items for this evening, please could you do so now? No petitions. Item 6, I invite the committee to approve the minutes from the meeting held on the 27th of July. Can I see a show of hands if everybody's happy to approve them? Agreed. Okay, thank you. Right, I'll now go through the applications that we have this evening. We have 3. We have 7.1, land adjacent to 67 Braeswick, Colchester, which is recommended for approval. Our presenting officer is John Miles. We have 1 speaker against, David Megan, and we have 1 speaker for, Jack Barron. We have Councillor Naylor here to speak, and we have a statement from Councillor Barber. 7.2, land between 7 and 15 Marlow Way, Colchester. This is recommended for approval, and our presenting officer is Chris Harden. We have a public speaker against, Simon Sorrell, and we have a public speaker for, Robert Pomery. And Councillor Roger Buston, we are going to read a statement which he has sent to the committee. Our 3rd application, 7.3, is Oak House, 1 West Lodge Bungalows, Bounstead Road, Colchester. This is recommended for approval. We have no speakers for and no speakers against, so I'm going to suggest one item this evening we could take en bloc, unless any members of the committee wish to speak on that item? No? Okay, so could we have a vote? All those in favour that we take that 7.3 en bloc this evening? Hello?
No, I'm keeping my hands down.
You can't?
Why?
Oh, sorry, you should have spoken up then if you weren't going before I took it to the vote. That's why I asked if any councillors had anything they wished to say.
I don't have anything to say, but...
It has to be unanimous to take something en bloc. It has to be unanimous.
Does it?
Yes.
Oh, right. I'll put my hand up.
Sorry about that, everyone. Right, thank you. So that is unanimous. Thank you. So I can confirm that those items, this item has been determined in line with the officer recommendation in the report and the amendment sheet, and there will not be further discussion on those items. Any interested parties in attendance for those items may wish to leave now. Thank you very much. Right. Next. Oh, yes. So now we are voting, John? Yeah. Right, okay, if we could return to 7.1, and could I ask John Miles to present the application? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. I will just share my screen, get the presentation up. Good evening, everyone. So item 7.1 is an application for approval of reserved matters for 27 dwellings at Braeswick, land adjacent to 67 Braeswick. The site plan is shown here, and the application is before members as it has been called in by Councillor Naylor. The application has been considered by members before at the committee on the 15th of June, where it was deferred with a view to look further at the design and layout, including the location of the children's play area, public open space, connectivity within the site, community space, and whether a reduction in dwellings numbers would enhance the design. Following the previous deferral, further correspondence has been received from the applicants, which is held on the planning file. This outlines a response to each of the matters raised under the deferral reasons and the applicant's position that they wish for the application to be determined on the basis of the plans which were previously presented to members. The committee report has also been updated and includes a section which includes some additional analysis on the matters raised in the reasons for deferral, and that can be found in the committee report between paragraphs 16.59 and 16.75. While the plans and elevations are the same as previously considered by members at the meeting on 15th of June, I will go through the site history, plans and some site photos again, particularly for the benefit of members who weren't in attendance at that previous committee meeting. So for context, the site is located to the north of Braeswick Road, the B1508, which runs in a northwest direction from the centre of Colchester, leading to the village of West Burgolt and ultimately Sudbury. The site is located on the outskirts of Colchester City, but inside the A12, which provides a firm border around Colchester and is beyond the west of the site. The site itself is rough grassland, sloping steeply down to the north and northwest into a wooded area, which lies alongside the A12. It's important to note that the site forms part of a wider allocation under policy NC3 of the Section 2 local plan. The wider allocation site is allocated for up to 70 dwellings, and it's shown in red here on the plan on your left. For reference, the site boundary is shown here in red on the right. As outlined, the scheme on the part of the larger allocation proposes 27 dwellings with 30% affordable housing. This current application for approval of reserved matters follows the outline permission that was granted on appeal for up to 27 dwellings in October 2020 under application 191522. The current application seeks approval for reserved matters, namely matters of appearance, landscaping, layout and scale. I'll now go through some further plans, and as discussed at the previous committee, the scheme has evolved since first submitted following negotiations and in response to comments from both council officers, including the council's urban design officer. One notable change since first submitted is the revisions to the layout, including to the south of the site, where the dwellings have been reorientated to address Colchester or Braeswick Road, and there's also stepped pedestrian access across the south to improve pedestrian connectivity. The position of the access onto Braeswick Road was established through the outline permission, where access was not reserved, so it was considered at outline stage and has been established through that previous approval. The access leads into this main access road, which has been designed with a view to eventually serve the remainder of the NC3 allocation, which I showed on that earlier plan there. Off the main access road, there is a shared surface which provides sloped access round to the dwellings to the west, as well as the main strategic area of public open space, which includes a leap, so a children's play area. This is just a further plan showing some additional information on the dwelling types, the dwellings proposed, and the layout. Public open space plan with, as I said, the more strategic area of public open space to the west of the site. This is just a refuse plan showing bin collection proposals, and this is a boundary treatment plan. Now, in terms of boundary treatment, the plans submitted detail brick boundary walls to the most sensitive public-facing boundaries and a mix of estate rail fencing and timber bollards to areas of public open space, both those incidental and the more strategic formal public open space. Hard landscaping plan, the use of tarmac is relatively limited to the access road and some of the driveways here. Majority of the surfaces are proposed to be finished in different specifications of block paving. And the wider submitted soft landscaping plans include areas of new tree planting, as well as the more strategic areas of public open space, some smaller incidental grassed areas within the site, some of which are proposed to be finished with wildflower seeding. I'll now move on to some illustrative street scene and section drawings, which provide some more context. And as you can see, the scheme looks to accommodate the changes in levels across the site, which I mentioned earlier, and you'll be able to see in some photos, which I will show you in a minute. And since the application was submitted, as discussed at the previous committee meeting, a number of changes have been made to not just the layout, but also the detailed design of the dwelling, including the addition of features with a view to improve visual interest and help contribute to site identity, including, but not limited to, additional brickwork features, rafters and eaves detailing, and feature bay windows and chimneys. The main proposed external materials include red clay tiles, facing brick, and timber cladding, which are considered appropriate for the context. And I'll move through some more detailed plans and elevations to give an idea of the dwellings proposed. This is one of the two, and this is the second of the proposed gateway pair of dwellings, which are proposed to sit at the entrance of the site, forming a legible entrance and sense of arrival to the site. The wider house types are a mix of 2 and 2.5 storey dwellings with a mix of 2, 3, 4 and 5 bedrooms. Let's go through the house types. And this is the proposed garaging to serve the dwellings, which is set back from the respective dwellings' principal elevations in most cases. I'll go through some site photos. This is a view taken on the bridge over the A12, looking towards the application site. You'll see the existing established trees, which to a degree limits visibility into the site from there. Moving along Braeswick Road, again, the quite established treed frontage continues. And this is just a view looking back towards the bridge. This is a view from near where the proposed site entrance would be on the right-hand side of the screen, Braeswick Road running along the right. It's a view looking east on the approach into Colchester, again, site on the left. This is a view looking directly towards the what would be the site's frontage. So the dwellings are proposed behind this existing tree belt, and the existing trees there will be largely retained except for the access, which, as I said, was agreed through the outline permission. It's a view looking back away from the site. Again, it's characteristic of the area, that in that part of Braeswick that there are quite established natural features to the frontage and that the dwellings often sit behind. Looking east along Braeswick Road, this gives you an idea of the character of development along there. The development seen on the left is relatively has been relatively recently constructed compared to some of the other properties in the area. This is a view looking back west, the bridge over the A12 visible in the distance there. And again, the relatively more recent development seen on the right. Just another view of it. So this is a view from within the site, looking out to the south. Some more recent development in the area. And this is a view over the site, looking northwest with the A12 so over on the left-hand side behind that tree line. These are just some more views from within the site. And behind that set of trees is the golf club, the A12, over to the left behind the other tree belts. This is a view from the west of the site, looking up the hill towards the development which fronts onto Braeswick Road. And this is a similar view. This is a view of the west of the site. It's relatively flat in this area compared to some places on the site, and this is the proposed approximate location for the public open space. Again, just some further views of the site, and that's a view of part of the remainder of the NC3 allocation, which is actually outside this application site boundary. So just end on a site plan here, and just to summarise material planning considerations, for the reasons outlined in the main body of the officer's report, officers remain of the view that the proposals, as revised since first submitted, and when assessed against relevant policies of the development plan, are acceptable in planning terms, including in terms of accessibility and connectivity, the position and provision of public open space, and design. Officers consider that the scheme overall delivers an appropriate quality of design, and subject to the conditions outlined, the proposed development is considered acceptable in terms of the scheme's appearance, landscaping, layout, and scale, and will ultimately deliver 27 sustainably located new homes, of which 30% will be affordable. With the proposals otherwise considered acceptable with regard to wider material planning considerations, the recommendation put forward to members is one of approval, subject to conditions. Thank you for listening, and I'll be happy to take any questions after the speakers we have this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Now call on our public speakers. Mr. Meagan, if you'd like to come forward. And you have 3 minutes, and the bell will go after 2 minutes. Thank you.
David Meagan from the Braeswick Residents Association. I've returned here today to place trust and support in this committee to get the best possible design outcome. Recognising the challenges ahead, given the contentious nature of this application, we acknowledge the difficulty this committee faces. It's important to note that the applicant's duty concludes upon construction and sale of houses, while our responsibility, representing new and existing residents, will continue. The application sets the tone for the future development in the area. This is why we wholeheartedly endorse the committee's bold and unanimous decision to pursue enhancements for this application. The committee debated in detail this proposal and voted unanimously to seek amendments to the design. Regrettably, absolutely nothing has changed. All the points raised in the developer's response have already been covered on multiple occasions. This committee conducted a site visit, skillfully grasped the complexities of the landscape, and recognised the importance of aligning the development with the surrounding character and building a high-quality development as outlined in the neighbourhood plan. The evidence provided by the applicant falls short of assuring the development will meet the standards expected for this area. This concern is increased each passing day, given the influence of inflation pressures impacting feasibility. The developer's resistance to engage and embrace the unanimous decision is a source of frustration. Instead of understanding the committee's authority, they have chosen to challenge it. They continue to justify meeting the bare minimum requirements, overlooking concerns about open space, accessibility, quality, and crucially density, which is the root cause of poor design and compromise. The developer claims compliance based on policy, but we remain sceptical. General policies have limitations when applied to complex sites. Essential policies relating to biodiversity and tree canopy, which are there to mitigate noise and pollution, which is incredibly important given this site's location and cannot be met on the site. Our neighbourhood plan underscores the necessity for a design of quality. The planning officer's perspective is that highest quality is subject and the low bar has been set given appeals that the council has lost recently. But this should not be a reason to settle for lower standards. While the design interpretations vary, the Residents' Association, Planning Committee and even the Urban Design Officer's report concur that this design lacks quality. This is the reason the committee made a very clear and reasonable request for amendments. The Planning Committee's authority is vital to ensuring developments aren't just approved because they meet the majority of policy, but to ensure that they're appropriately scaled and there is a benefit to both new and existing residents. I trust this committee will continue to demonstrate its expertise, knowledge and courage possible outcome for residents of Braesvic. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Could I now call on Mr. Barron to come forward, please? And the same, you have 3 minutes and the bell will go after 2. Thank you.
Good evening all, I'm Jack Barron. I'm the project architect, along with a team of architects, planners and engineers. Thank you for letting me speak again this evening. Since the application was deferred at Planning Committee on the 15th of June, we've listened to the comments raised and so I've gone away to review. As the case officer outlines, these items predominantly relate mainly to the location of open space and play space along the western boundary. So I haven't actually visited the site, so our view acknowledged it is very technical constrained, including the steep topography and proximity to the A12. It is for these reasons, as outlined within a deferral response letter, so that based on the 18th of July, that we continue to support this current layout as part of a policy compliant development. Following the case officer's presentation this evening, so the RM submission proposes a policy compliant functional area of a public open space and play space, in line with the requirements of the local plan policies, DM15 and DM18. With a secure, defensible boundary, so it's overlooked by residents, so it's as in sort of design, sort of secure by design requirement, and that's also acknowledged within the committee report. There has been extensive discussions as to the most appropriate location of the open space and the layout. Since agreed upon the early pre-app meetings, it's continued through public engagement, sort of ongoing discussions throughout the plan application, that the open space provision has consistently been proposed on the western boundary, so with no objection. So as John has outlined, it is the most flattest area of the site, and to try to work with the levels and create sort of a usable open space, so it's deemed the most best place for it to be located. So especially with the boundary to be the woodland, so adjacent to this we can create sort of a natural area that can work with the residents. So unlike the flat sites, the usual urban design principles that cannot be applied in this location, whereby the design must respond to the site's unique constraints.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid your time's up.
Yeah.
Sorry, carry on.
The committee report acknowledges that the accessibility and the functionality of space has been enhanced as part of these discussions to reach a favourable outcome. To ensure this area remains particularly usable, a suitable planning condition has been suggested, requiring the details of these levels to ensure the amenity and the public spaces achieve an acceptable relationship with the surrounding landscape. In summary, the application site lies within an allocation for up to 70 dwellings. It does have an outline consent for 27 dwellings. And it is that we've exercised all the possible sort of layout options, like during an extensive design process for the past 2 years, pre-app engagement, public consultations, and sort of even like during the application itself, to work with the topography as well as the site's constraints. Throughout the submission, we have responded to the design concerns raised by the design officers throughout the application, as well as amended the scheme accordingly.
Thank you. That is your 3 minutes. My apologies for interrupting you.
Thank you.
Could I now call on Councillor Naylor? And you do have up to 5 minutes, and the bell will go after 4. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk to you about this extremely important matter before you. I just also want to say to those members who are substituting, this is an extremely complex planning application, and by no means is as straightforward as it might first appear in some of the previous speakers. I also think it's no means as cut and dried as it might appear, that nothing further might be done to improve the design of this development and ensure that those who live there in the future enjoy living there and frankly have no nasty surprises about the fact that they don't enjoy living there because not enough was done to make this design successful. So I want to draw your attention to the letter that has been placed on file that I don't think you have before you, because actually I was really surprised by the tone of that letter. The senior town planner took a very robust approach and chose to challenge the legitimacy of the committee's decision to defer, the unanimous committee's decision to defer, which to my mind calls into question the reputation of this committee and is a very important point that must be addressed either by the committee directly or outside of this meeting. It is essential that we retain confidence in this committee and its decisions. I understand that the claims made in that letter, the challenge to the committee, is not correct. And in fact, your decision to defer was lawful. I just want to continue on that point. So having established that the senior town planner sought to establish that your decision was incorrect, and I believe it to be correct, let's just examine that letter. So members will no doubt be very concerned about that if you didn't know about it already. And you may also, given that the role of this committee is to interrogate matters based on evidence and fact, and you may wonder about the accuracy of other statements in that letter, or indeed the attitude of the applicant that's being displayed towards the committee. The letter amounts to a challenge to the committee, so we are where we are. Given the return of this plan without addressing any of the committee's intentions by deferring, I've reread the report and I would draw your attention to page 24, paragraph 8.15, in which a statutory consultee, the urban design officer, I said at the last meeting, this is lukewarm, I want to revise that. I've now reread this and I consider this to be a view that indicates that the urban design officer does not have confidence that this development meets the tests. The language that's used is telling. It says, the proposal lacks several significant features that contribute positively to placemaking. The urban design officer goes on to say it fails to achieve a high degree of visual interest or distinctive character and identity across the scheme. Finally, it concludes with, notwithstanding issues regarding levels, which you've just heard, part of the site is actually virtually impossible to walk on. It's steeper than is permissible for a road to be built. Notwithstanding that, it is therefore considered the proposal could establish an adequate sense of place. To my mind, that is hardly a ringing endorsement. I would encourage the committee to consider either refusing or deferring this application again, thereby giving the applicant further opportunity to reconsider their position. And I would also suggest that the committee, if in your judgment, Chair, that seems appropriate, might consider calling the urban design officer to elucidate this statement and give further factual evidence and information, which the deferral calls for you to better understand those concerns, which I think are more than blandly hinted at here. This is not a ringing endorsement. And I'd just like to echo the point made by Mr. Mehigan that the inflationary pressures on this site means every day it costs more and more to execute what we would know to be very complex civil engineering to make that site work. I really worry that there will be value engineering in the future that will see this development rowed back to a simple grey box line of houses. I request, Chair,
Thank you very much.
Defer.
5 minutes. Thank you very much, Councillor Naylor. Thank you. We now have a statement from Councillor Barber, which will be read by Robert. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Dear Committee, thank you for your deferral at the previous meeting to ensure the outstanding reserved matters concerns can be considered further and resolved. I ask that you further defer or refuse this application for the following reason. Colchester Council has adopted the Myland and Braeswick Neighbourhood Plan as planning policy of the Council. There are two policies I wish to draw to your attention on design, which are cited in the report. HOU 1. Developers should achieve the highest quality of design commensurate with current national and local design guidance. And DPR 1. Developments will aim to attain the highest quality and design standards and, where appropriate, encourage the use of relevant national standards by developers in order to achieve the highest possible levels of overall sustainability in the design and layout of new developments. The Council's Urban Design Officer stated that the current proposals fail to achieve a high degree of visual interest or distinctive character and identify across the wider scheme. The officer concludes that there is an adequate sense of place. Therefore, on this matter, the current application has not reached the standard the Council has adopted as policy. I therefore do not consider that the application is at a stage that it can be passed. I urge the committee to request the application is reviewed further before it can be passed. Councillor Lewis Barber.
Thank you very much. Could I now ask John if you could respond to all those questions, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so first and foremost, at this stage where we are at, we have the scheme before us that I've showed you, the scheme for 27 dwellings, and ultimately our position at this time is that we are required to consider that scheme on its own merits. And in terms of design quality, officers are of the view it is a balanced judgment as recognised in the report. Ultimately, the decision before members this evening is the scheme as revised and is before members today acceptable in planning terms. Officers are of the view that the scheme as revised is for the reasons outlined in the officer's report. But ultimately, as I say, it's a matter of planning judgment and design is subjective. If we are looking at sort of some of the aspects we normally look for in terms of achieving a high quality of design, the scheme is considered as revised to deliver a number of positive elements in terms of the detailed design of the dwellings. As I say, the layout has been improved since first submitted, and it is considered a policy requirement in terms of things like public open space provisions, private amenity provisions, and parking provisions. In terms of issues of inflationary pressures and effectively the potential for, say, a developer to look to water down the scheme effectively between approval and completion, we are afforded a degree of protection by the National Planning Policy Framework and the policies within that, including specifically paragraph 135, which we discussed. at the previous committee meeting when this application was considered, which does give us some control and does give us the control to ensure that the quality of approved development is not materially diminished between permission and completion as a result of changes being made to the permitted scheme. See, that sort of follows the consideration that I'm sure members, the detailed consideration the members give tonight to the design as currently proposed, and which I'll be happy to answer any specific queries on where I can. In terms of biodiversity and tree canopy cover, no, it's recognised that the scheme cannot deliver the uplift required by policy on site. However, there are provisions under the conditions of the local plan for off-site provisions where it is considered it isn't feasible to accommodate those on site, and those off-site provisions are to be secured by way of or proposed to be secured by way of appropriately worded conditions. I think hopefully that touched upon everything raised, but I'd be happy to come back on any points if any further clarification or detail is needed. Thank you.
Okay, I'm now going to open this up to the committee, and I have Councillor McCarthy first, please.
Thank you. It's a very, very quick one. Some of the speakers this evening were talking about deferral or another deferral. This is a question for John or Simon or both. Unless I've got this wrong, because we've deferred it once, are we able to defer again before we start going down that path potentially? Or is it a case now if we either approve this application or refuse it? That was all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, in terms of your ability to defer, you can defer it again. However, you have deferred it once and sought revisions, and you have a clear statement from the senior town planner on behalf of the applicants. And should you wish to defer it again, you may well not achieve a further positive outcome. So I think our advice to you would probably be a better decision to make a substantive decision this evening, either to accept the officer recommendation and approve, or alternatively seek an alternative outcome around a refusal based on design quality. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the contribution from everybody this evening. I've been sort of playing catch up on this a little bit, obviously substituting tonight. Yeah, I mean, I can see the history of it. I would agree with some of the comments. I mean, the words from the urban design officer are quite capited, and I do kind of say this meets the bare minimum. And I don't think that's really a great thing for this council. You know, unless we end up with a sort of the slogan, Colchester City Council striving for mediocrity as our sort of strapline. So I am uneasy about it. Looking at the design, the public open space is literally stuffed along the edges in space which would have to be left anyway, because that's where for the shielding and for the trees. A design which actually had that public open space as a far more central feature of the development would result in a much nicer place to live, frankly, afterwards. Looking at the history, I mean, if we go back to the original appeal, and I utterly accept that this debate is not about the principle of development here, there is planning permission for 27 dwellings. But if we actually go back to the original appeal, the inspector did, I think, perhaps foresee some of this difficulty, because if you read what he actually said, paragraph 78 of the appeal conclusion, the description of the proposed development submitted as an outline application of up to, and he's actually emphasised the up to, he's put that in bold and italics, 27 dwellings, allows scope for negotiation when reserved matters are submitted. Now, there doesn't seem to have been a great deal of negotiation here, because the maximum was 27 and we've negotiated 27. So there's not been a lot of give and take. And if we read the letter, which I think some people have seen, it was referred to, it's the letter of 18th of July, I don't think it's very helpful from the applicant, because it's really kind of saying, it's a challenge to us, really. It's saying, we don't wish to engage with you, we don't wish to talk to you, take it or leave it. And I don't think that that's a particularly wise response to the committee's comments when it deferred it unanimously when this last came before the committee. My preference would be for everybody to go away and think again and maybe get talking, because it's far more constructive for everybody and indeed far faster for everybody, because I assume the applicant wishes to get on and get this built, to do it that way. If we don't think that's possible, then, and they really want it determined and want to play sort of hardball on this, then maybe we should start talking about reasons for refusal.
Thank you. Councillor Lissamore?
Thank you. Yes, to follow on from Councillor Dundas, I'm extremely concerned about the design here. I want better for this city, and I'm extremely concerned that the developer does seem to have come back and said, no, this is it, this is what we're going for, like it or lump it. So, as I say, that greatly concerns me, and the fact that in paragraph 8.15 it does say could establish an adequate sense of place. Could, not necessarily does. The design, according to the documentation, does lack quality, and that, again, that really concerns me. Do we give the applicant one more chance to come back with a better design? Possibly, yes, as Councillor Dundas has put forward. I think they do need one more chance to come back with a better design. Otherwise, yes, we look at reasons for refusal. So I would like to put forward that we defer for redesign, using paragraph 8.15, that the urban design officer does not seem that it has an adequate sense of place.
So is that a proposal, Councillor Lissamore? Do we have a seconder for that, please? Councillor McLean. Thank you. John, did you want to answer those before we move on to other councillors?
Yes, so as touched upon, the outline permission is for up to 27 dwellings. So there is, in a sense, that flexibility there, and that's something that was considered at appeal. The inspector did, however, it's helpful potentially if I read a section from the appeal decision, where the inspector acknowledges, however, that the making of most effective use of land in line with paragraph 123 of the framework is not just about increasing densities, but also seeking an appropriate form of design which reflects local context. However, even with the site's constraints, the proposed scheme could be provided to an acceptable design, referring to the outline indicative scheme of 27, and would not appear out of place, subject to careful consideration of outstanding reserved matters. And yet, so the position we are this evening is that careful consideration of outstanding reserved matters, as touched upon. I think it is also worth noting that there have been some lengthy negotiations and discussions between parties up to this stage to secure the revisions that are before members. Ultimately, whether members consider that the scheme has reached a stage where the design quality is such that they're satisfied it is in compliance with our adopted policies. Ultimately, that's a decision for members. But just in terms of that background, I just thought it is important to highlight that there have been some negotiations and discussions there already to reach this stage. But ultimately, where we go from here is a decision for members. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Davison.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Yes, very disappointed at the applicant's response to our reasonable request to try and improve this site. And I agree with my fellow colleagues that actually, we expect better in Colchester. And the point is that the up to 27 that the inspector granted on appeal, that's fine, but actually, as Mr. Miles has already mentioned, it's not even providing the off-seat, the tree cover. That's got to be sent somewhere else. So actually, it isn't a whole holistic design on the site. And I just think that the design as such Mr. Miles was often saying as revised, but it's exactly the same as we saw back in June. It hasn't been revised one iota, apart from the ensuring there's a level access to the playground. And I'm disappointed that, and as Councillor Dundas has already said, really, do we give the opportunity to the developer to say, look, please think again, you could do better, we would like a better scheme, or actually, are we wasting our time? And the point is, this is for Colchester as a city. This is just one developer. If other developers think they can get away with second rate or average, that isn't really what we're aspiring to, is it, as a city? So, I'm very much balanced between referral, refusal, or a deferment at the moment. Can I just ask Mr. Miles, is it possible to see pictures of the affordable housing? Because I think you showed us all the best ones, but I just question whether the affordable housing is even worse.
So I'm just getting the plot numbers up so I can then coordinate them with the elevation drawings. So yeah, I will share my screen now. So the elevations of the affordable units were shown when I did a run through all of the house types. They're included in there, but I'll happily go back to them specifically for some additional context. So as I say, yeah, this is the site plan. The affordable and shared ownership overlook the public open space here to the west. So it's plot numbers 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. So yeah, these are. So that's the effectively sort of terraced house type. So they're 3 affordable units, and that scale and form is replicated on the other 3 attached units there. I can get up some more elevations of the other one. Apologies for my mistake. I don't think they are all there. 6 to 8. So bear with me a moment, and I'll have that back for members in a moment for you. Thank you. Would we like to continue deliberation, sorry, while I get that up, because that's just on a separate screen. Thank you.
Okay, could we move on to Councillor Young then, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, this is interesting. I think it is all about the design, isn't it? I'm glad that Councillor Davidson brought up affordable housing, because let's be honest, we need as much as we can get as soon as we can get it, because there are people living in dreadful accommodation at the moment who desperately need housing, and so this is a positive impact on that. Looking at the paragraph 8.15 from the Urban Design Officer, I mean, Councillor Naylor was very clever, and if I was the ward councillor, I'd probably done the same, in just highlighting the negative aspects of what the Urban Design Officer has said. But they've also said, however, proposed built form broadly complies with policy requirements in terms of form and materiality. Nevertheless, the permeability of the proposal has been increased and improvements have been made to proposed built environment, increasing its consistency. Additionally, the accessibility and functionality of the public open space has been enhanced. An appropriate level of amenity appears deliverable. So no, it's not a ringing endorsement, but it's not a totally negative assessment by the Urban Design Officer. But the main issues here are in 16.5 to 16.18. The density cannot be an issue because it's got outline permission for 27 dwellings. So we have to look at 16.14 is the one, I think. It's the levels, isn't it, that is causing some of the issues here. And so I just want assurance from the officers, because you talk about it is considered the challenges with regards to levels is symptomatic of the challenging topography of the site and not specifically as a result of the density. So could you just assure me that the design and the scheme that we've got before us will meet that challenge that you talk about. And the other thing that slightly concerns me is the accessibility to the public open space and the play area. How much longer, roughly, would it take to use the longer route for people in wheelchairs or with buggies and pushchairs and prams, who are likely, let's be honest, to use a play area, to get to, rather than using the stepped way to go to the public open space and the play area? I think that's all the questions I have, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Are you in a position, John, to...
I am, yes, apologies for that. Yeah. So this is plots 4 and 5, which are two of the affordable homes. And I'm sorry, I'll have to stop sharing and share again. And these are the ones specifically that I showed in the presentation just a moment ago. So there's sort of two blocks which would look like that, and then the semi-detached pair, which I showed just a moment ago. In terms of the wider issues raised, yeah, obviously a topic for significant discussion is the levels and the challenges that the levels present. As put in the report, it's considered that the challenges are symptomatic of the topography of the site, the challenging topography of the site, and not necessarily related to the density. It is recognised in the report that there is a real need for certainty and security around those levels to ensure an appropriate relationship between properties and in terms of between amenity spaces. So there are two conditions recommended within the recommended list of conditions. One which requires significant and additional detail on levels to be submitted to ensure that those suitable relationships are there. So things like sections provided, spot heights, to give us that additional certainty that the relationship between properties and surrounding land and buildings will be satisfactory. The design quality, yeah, as I said, it is a balanced judgment. It's recognised that there are some areas where the urban design officer has said he considers that the applicants can go further, but there are also a number of aspects, as recognised by the urban design officer, where significant improvements have been made, and the proposals are considered to meet our policy requirements in those terms. And it is difficult as well with a design that we can't view it necessarily in isolation. That there is challenging topography with the site, and while that's not a reason then to accept something which we don't consider as acceptable on its own merit, we do have to be mindful as well of issues of viability. And while we will strive for the highest quality of design possible, we can't view it in a vacuum, if you like, and we do have to be mindful of the need for a scheme to ultimately be deliverable if we are to get the wider benefits in terms of housing provisions and affordable housing provisions. But as I say, those matters and that balance is ultimately a matter for planning judgment and a matter for consideration by members. In terms of accessibility, I will share the site plan again, because I think that would be helpful while we have those discussions for context. So yeah, and apologies if there's any confusion. As I outlined, the scheme hasn't been revised since it was previously considered by members, but it has been revised since originally submitted. So apologies if there's any confusion there, but that was over a number of months following feedback from council officers and the urban design officer. We've had these revisions, and one of the revisions was there was previously quite a rigid layout where the dwellings didn't front Braeswick Road, and there was no connectivity at the south of the site at all. Through part of those negotiations, these dwellings to the south have been reorientated to achieve an acceptable frontage to Braeswick Road, but it also has the added benefit of additional connectivity across the south of the site, albeit that it is a stepped access. However, the differences in levels, as outlined in the committee report, do present functional issues, which it is considered would mean a sloped access across the south of the site simply wouldn't be feasible, in that the levels would be too steep to then be usable by, say, a person in a wheelchair. The sloped access is provided to the play area, albeit a slightly longer route, but what that slightly longer route does mean is that the difficulties and the quite steep nature of the site, it can be more gradually accommodated, because by travelling a further distance, the gradients can be shallower, providing a gentler slope, which, while longer, is ultimately considered more accessible in the sense that you don't have that steep slope there. Hopefully that touched upon everything. I don't know if Simon, sorry, had anything to add. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, if I can briefly try and assist members in their deliberations. Certainly, design is always a subjective matter and a very complex one at the best of times. So I think if we can return to first principles, one of the things about design and design quality, is that it's essentially a contextual yardstick rather than being taken in isolation. And I think one of the things I'd like you to consider this evening, having regard to policy SP7 of the local plan, which is all about placemaking, is that the site should respond positively to local character. And I think what I'd like you to do is to look again at the layout which John has shown you, and particularly the key view from the main street frontage, and particularly the issue of the retention of a landscape screen buffer belt and the proportion of built form to space along that frontage. I'd like you to decide whether, having regard to the context of the remainder of that street, whether this scheme is a good example of development in context, insofar as the spaces and landscape spaces in front of those dwellings respond in a positive way to the established pattern of development. I think it would be helpful if John could possibly scan to the city side of the development to illustrate the extent of built form to frontage along that street as a whole. Because I often think an inspector looking at this development to decide whether it's contextually appropriate will look at its context and particularly what surrounds it and the degree of built frontage versus open space, because I think essentially members are suggesting this is overdevelopment. So if we look at the character of what is before you along that street in terms of the proportion of built form to green frontage, and then compare that with the scheme, I think that would be a very good test of how an inspector would view a potential refusal, having regard to whether the scheme responds positively to local character as a fundamental yardstick. So if we can look at that scheme before us now, the established character of built form, walls, lots of brick, strong materiality there, and then the scheme as is shown in the layout. I would suggest that the presence of a much greater proportion of landscaping to that frontage and a greater separation of those buildings than is obviously evident on the adjacent development would suggest to me that actually it does respond positively to local character and contextually does not represent poor design. But that is a decision for you to make. But I think it is a very common sense approach to a very complex and abstract concept of contextual design and whether this proposed scheme does respond to that local character. As John set out, along the frontage opposite this site, there is this predominance of green space and established planting, and that is incorporated in the scheme before you. And I would suggest that if we look, as you can see in the greyed out area, the proportion of built form is markedly greater than is now proposed on this site as a proportion of built form to space and planting. So it could be argued that certainly the frontage part of this site does in fact achieve a high quality of design. That's obviously a personal perspective, but one which I think does need to, that could be helpful to you in your consideration and deliberation. As you can see there, Chairman, There is a very high proportion of built frontage, a lot of forecourt parking along that established street frontage, and that will be taken into account should an inspector be required to consider in context whether the proposal is contextually appropriate. If we return to the scheme, John, members can see that the retention of that green planted frontage does form part of the scheme as submitted, and indeed there is a very good separation of those dwellings as proposed on the site frontage. So in context, it is open for you to consider whether this represents good contextual design. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I think we need to reach a decision, so I'm going to call on Councillor Warnes first and then Councillor McLean, and unless anybody's got anything really extra to add, then did you want to speak, Councillor Lismore? If you could keep it brief, because I think we've gone round and we've heard everything now. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I recognise the points that Simon's making, that it seeks to preserve the rural nature of the site as you get closer to the A12, and does that by putting the proposed development behind existing hedges and trees. So I can see that as you're driving down the A12, it maintains that rural look, and as Simon pointed out, as you get further towards the city, it becomes more sort of built up. But that development has built up over time. It's not something that's necessarily appeared recently, and therefore local context and the national planning policy frameworks desire to have beautiful design are two things that I want to know more about. So what is the local context? Is it basically Victorian style? Is it Edwardian style? Is it Georgian style? Is it mock all of those things? Or is it modernist? It's probably a mix. But what I couldn't see from the plans, because A, they weren't big enough to see, i.e. you saw a number of houses, 4 or 5 houses, but you didn't see the individual design of houses, so you couldn't see what the actual decorative additions to the buildings would be that would turn them from being minimalist compliant to being beautiful buildings, which is what the national planning policy framework is basically asking for. And I'd like to know what the rationale was, and it's probably down to levels, but I'd like to hear it, what the rationale was for not putting the play area within the middle of the site, where it would be actually overlooked more, and therefore in terms of usage would probably allow it to be self-managed and probably safer. And so we come down to the point that everyone's been talking about, which is the land levels and the amount of civil engineering that would be needed in order to mitigate the actual levels versus the standard of design deliverable whilst keeping the site viable. And that's what I don't feel I have enough information about, because when the National Policy Planning Framework came in, it was aiming to lift the standard of design and get away from your 1980s, 1990s box, and to actually produce things that are beautiful and are in the local context. And I don't feel this report tells us enough about that. And I also wonder whether I think it was the paragraph 815, it was the landscape advisor, whether the views expressed that they are just a very short précis within the report, because we don't actually know what the advisor thought was actually missing. It talks about significant things missing, and then talks about it has the ability to provide a sense of place and was therefore adequate, but there's no detail of what the advisor thought was missing. And I feel I need that to be able to judge whether this is a viable site that mitigates the levels and seeks to lift the design and create beautiful buildings. Thank you.
Councillor Jackie McLean.
Thank you, Chair. My biggest problem I have with this is the wording. If the report had more confidence to give to us, I could have gone forward and made a decision. But when you've got could be, maybe, should be, adequate, that's not, I just don't think it's fair to put that on us, because we're really in the middle of thinking, well, will it do the job it's designed to do, or could we have done better? So I think we're all a little bit unsure putting our name behind something if we're not certain it's going to run the course and actually do a good job for the residents of giving them, you know, some desirable housing. And I think the play area being put in the corner is not fair on the children or the site. And also with the weather patterns we're having at the moment, I know it won't go on forevermore, but well, it could be. But a deluge of rain, would that just swamp that corner plot? And will there be any mitigation for flooding and dispersing all the water fairly fast? So there's just a couple of concerns which just doesn't give me confidence.
Councillor Dundas.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of quick questions. Firstly, I'm sure there is, but I just wanted to clarify that the footpath along Braeswick is being extended up to this development, because at the moment there's no footpath along that side of the road beyond the existing dwellings. So I think it is. I think I can see it on the plans. Secondly, I just wanted to pick up on something actually in the letter from, well, not the applicant, the applicant's agents, which says, in addition, given the proximity of the site to the A12, the public open space acts as a landscape buffer along the western boundary. Given the noise levels in this part of the site, it would not be appropriate to locate housing here. So I'm a little bit concerned that we're saying that it's far too noisy for a house with triple or double glazing, but it's great for a children's playground or a nice area where people are going to sit on a summer's afternoon having a picnic, presumably with very raised voices as lorries thunder by. What criteria do we apply to public open space in terms of pollution and noise pollution?
Thank you. And Councillor Lissamore, final speaker.
Thank you. I know I'm subbing on this committee today. I do not normally sit on the planning committee, but I do not wish to go against what a previous planning committee has actually asked for. They were not happy and they wanted the design changed. So I refuse to contradict that decision. The developer has dug their heels in and said, this is it. But I believe as a committee, we should be digging our heels in and saying, no, the previous committee were not happy with design. We're not happy with design. It needs to be deferred to look at the redesign again. Otherwise, you have a substantial risk of it being refused.
Thank you. Would you like to make final comments on that, John, please?
Yeah, I'll summarise quickly, then hand over to Simon. So, there will fundamentally be a change in the character of the site. That change in the character of the site was, however, accepted when outline permission was granted for up to 27 dwellings. As we, as you've seen and as we've discussed, there is a significant tree belt to the south of the site. The west and the north, and to the east, it is bounded by existing development. So, in terms of wider visibility, the site is quite well contained, and as part of the landscaping condition, additional tree planting is also to be secured to the west of the site, further sort of improving the natural cover there. In terms of sort of the positive design features specifically, I'll go back to some of the elevations I'll just quickly show. Since first submitted, there have been a number of positive design features added following negotiations, so detailed design features, additive design features, and some modelling. This is one example of one of the dwelling types. See if I can zoom in a bit so it's a bit clearer. Okay, so there's features such as structural chimneys. We have some projecting bay windows here for modelling. What unfortunately you might not be able to quite make out is there's eaves detailing, things like Pentis boards to windows, brick headers to windows with a brick finish. We have decorative soffit boards. And as I said, there's a number of these features to the dwellings, which is considered to provide a good degree of visual interest and will ultimately contribute to that site identity and site character. So since the application was first submitted, that has been revised with a view to sort of move away from those blank boxes to really deliver some detailed design features and visual interest with a view to contribute to site identity and site character. In terms of the character of the wider area, it is quite mixed, but it is considered that these dwellings won't appear out of context when compared to the other development in the area. Indeed, they do share some features which are common to properties in the area. So especially the frontage dwellings, they're of a scale and a massing and a form that is considered will sit comfortably with the surrounding development and house types. In terms of materiality, the main external materials of red clay tiles, facing brick and timber cladding are also considered appropriate in the context and are in keeping with the materiality of other dwellings and buildings in the area. On the issue of the play area and its location to the edge of the site, my understanding is that that's primarily driven by the levels, and that is the area of the site which is the flattest. I think from my understanding there would be practical issues with locating it towards the middle of the site, as has been outlined, that there are some quite significant changes in levels. So I suppose there'd be a question, if you were to locate it in the middle of the site, would you then end up with a play area which was itself sloped? I think that's one consideration. And in terms of then, we'd look to have dwellings fronting the public open space. If you were to have the public open space in the middle of the site, as touched upon, you would need to likely move some dwellings further west, closer to the road. Then I think that there might be more difficulty in terms of levels and how you would accommodate those. Flooding, I think, was one of the other things, and sustainable urban drainage. So that is covered through the outline permission. There is a very detailed sustainable urban drainage scheme condition, which sets things like discharge rates and ensuring that there's enough permeable land, that there's not issues, say, with surface water or increasing flood risk elsewhere. I think the last one was the presence of a footpath to the site frontage. Again, that is dealt with through the outline permission. As part of the legal agreement, there are highways works which the developer would be required to carry out, which includes highway and junction improvements. And there is also the provision of additional bus stops in that location. I think that covered everything, but happy to come back in after Simon if there's anything else. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is it going to be quick?
It is. Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Miles, 318, the Landscape Officer's report, he's added some suggested comments in blue. His wording is, consider revising any or similar note to or similar to LPA consent. Planning officer to take a view on the validity of the applicant's planning justification for not complying to this standard CCC requirement. Should we add that note?
Yep, so that is added to the landscape plans that is now submitted. These comments were received before the very latest landscape proposals, which are indexed. So on those latest landscape proposals, it does say or similar with LPA consent. So I think that was a matter of, we didn't want ambiguity there, that the developer might think it's similar, we might not think it's similar. So that certainty is included there. But there are also the landscaping conditions which require the details to be submitted for formal agreement. So if we weren't satisfied with the wording, that could be picked up then. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, members, I think that was a really detailed, thorough debate that we've had this evening. And I think we all recognise that it's a really complex site. But bottom line, it has got outline planning for 27 dwellings. So bearing that in mind, We have one proposal on the table, and I wonder, Councillor Lissamore, if you could do a more precise wording so we know exactly what we're voting on. Yes, would you like Robert to read out what he's written down? Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Lismore, I took the advantage of the time between discussions to write down something that might be appropriate for members. So that the application is deferred and that delegated authority is given to the development manager to seek amendments to the urban design in consultation with the urban design officer under paragraph 8.15 to improve the design of the proposal. Now, obviously, it's up to Simon and John to comment further on what they would like from that perspective. That's just my notes from what you've said, Councillor.
Can I just clarify then that following discussions, would the matter come back to the planning committee?
We can put that into the recommendation as well, but it's generally a rule that when the planning committee makes a decision such as that, the normal procedure is that it would come back anyway, but it's not a problem at all to put that in there.
Simon.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just ask members if they could possibly elaborate further on the nature of the urban design revisions that you'd like us to seek, so we can be quite specific in what we're trying to deliver for you. I think in terms of the house types, as hopefully John's demonstrated, they are quite sympathetic in terms of their overall design. I'm not sure that we're going to deliver any significant enhancements to the actual design of the unit, so I'm assuming it relates to layout and matters of well, it's open to the members, Chair, to give us further guidance as to what they'd like us to seek.
Yes, Councillor Dundas, but I do think we have to be far more precise. This is all very vague.
I think something around the disjointed layout of the public open space, because it's pepper potted in little bits, little corners where you actually have to have some space because there's a road anyway. I think that the fundamental layout regarding the open space is probably one of the big concerns, or I'm interpreting it as one of the big concerns of the committee.
Simon?
Thank you, Chair. That's very helpful. By pepper potting, I'm assuming you mean it's all dispersed to the perimeter, and you'd like to see a more consolidated and usable area of public open space. Is that right?
Yes, I think so. Yeah, I think I've interpreted that.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Anyone else? Councillor Young?
Yeah, having heard from the officers and members, I don't think we can keep kicking the can down the road. I think we've gone as far as we can. I don't think there's going to be much more given to us. So we have to decide yes or no tonight, in my opinion. And I think it's good enough for approval. It has got outline planning permission. I think you're clutching at straws with the play area. The play area has to be there for the reasons that John quite clearly outlined. You can't have a stepped, well, you can have a stepped play area, but it's going to be fraught with risk, I would have thought. So, yeah, I'm not going to vote for deferral. I'm going to, with all the conditions attached, if that goes down, I will move approval of the recommendations.
So are you putting forward that as an alternative
yes,
proposal?
Yes, I am, Chair. Yes, I will, Chair.
And do we have a seconder for that, by the way? Councillor McLean.
Do you?
Okay, Chair. So just to confirm, just to confirm with the proposer and seconder the points that were raised there. So I got down urban design improvements of the layout and disjointed layout of public open space, and that included the pepper potting point, as well as the consolidated open space. Now, are the proposer and seconder happy with that added on to the point that I already made with the point that it would come back to the planning committee? Thank you, Chair. I think we can, if Mr. Cairns doesn't have any other comments, he's indicating no, we can go to a vote.
All right, can I ask all those in favour to raise their hands, please, of the current proposal?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
And all those against?
4.
Any abstentions?
That motion is carried, Chair.
That concludes that item. Okay. So anyone from that item, if you'd like to leave the room, we'll have a pause for a moment and then we'll go on to the second item. Okay, everyone, are you happy to move on to the next application, 7.2, or did people want a comfort break at this moment in time? Do you? 10 minutes?
Yes, it starts at 7.
Okay, sorry, we will have a break then for 10 minutes, re-emerging here at 7:30, please. Your microphone's on. Okay, welcome back everybody. We now move on to application 7.2, which is the land between 7 and 15 Marlow Way, which is recommended for approval. So if I could ask Chris Harden to present it, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, so this is the application to vary condition 2, which is the drawings for the previously approved 3 dwellings. You'll note from the report this was deferred from the 25th of May meeting to allow officers to try and secure the lowering of the roofs on plots 2 and 3. So I'll just remind you of the site. There it is outlined in red with the surroundings. This is basically what testing, right. So this is what is now proposed. Essentially, the revisions from the last committee involve right, try that. So basically what we've got now compared to the previous committee, we've got the lowering of plots 2 and 3. Just to remind you that plot 1 was also proposed to be lowered as well. So plot 1 is this one, 2 and 3. So this would be the resultant street scene. So plot 1 would be lowered by 0.415, so that it would be 0.3 higher than number 7 overall. And you'll recall that the lowering involved making the central element of the roof flat and having chimneys at either end to disguise that flat-roofed proposal. And the same procedure would be applied to number 2. That's been lowered by 0.374. And then the same procedure would be applied to the ridge on plot 3, so that would be lowered by 0.309. The gable on this plot would remain the same. So the ridge would be 0.3 higher than number 15, and the gable would remain at 0.587 above the ridge of number 15. So that's the resultant street scene with the revisions undertaken. And that is a picture of the as-built scheme showing the front elevations. So you'll see the existing heights higher than the neighbouring properties. This is a close-up view of the changes to plot 1. And the same for plot 2, if we need those later on. And then for plot 3. So the ridge at the back being reduced. And then this shows the difference between the gable of plot 3 and the neighbouring property. And these are the elevations of plot 1, and plot 2, and plot 3. And this is the layout of the proposal. Just to remind you that the site, or the siting of number 7 was originally shown slightly differently, by about 0.5 of a metre. So it is 0.5 closer than was previously approved. And that's the layout of the scheme. This is a drawing showing that the 45-degree rules are not broken in terms of impairment on neighbouring windows, and that also includes from the kitchens which were built larger than as approved as was previously presented. And these are photographs of the street scene, which was taken before windows were put in. Just take you through these as a reminder. That's the gap between the dwellings. You can see the manor house to the rear, glimpses of it. Trees retained at the front. There's a gap between the properties at this end of the scheme, which was as approved. It's a view looking the other way towards the scheme. Gap between neighbouring properties from the rear of the site when it wasn't completed. Gap again. Gap the other end of the site. That's the rear of the property showing the kitchen, which was higher than was previously agreed. It's a more advanced picture. A picture sent in by one of the neighbours to put on the screen. And this picture shows what the site originally looked like when it was open and undeveloped. It's a more advanced picture and showing the floor plan layouts if we need those later on. I'll just take you back to the scheme now. Take you back to the street scene. So in terms of planning considerations, the principle of 3 dwellings has already been previously agreed, so the issues are the differences between this and the approved scheme. You'll note that the issue arose because the neighbouring dwellings were shown too high on the approved street scene plans. So it's not the fact that the dwellings have been built higher than is approved, it was the fact that the dwellings either end of the site were shown higher than they really are. So it was the relationship to neighbouring properties that differed. So with the revisions put forward, we consider the relationship of the new dwellings to the neighbouring properties and the overall street scene is satisfactory. It's not unusual to have height variations within street scenes. These are minimal height variations, as you can see from the street scene drawing. All plots would be lowered and they would visually be acceptable in the officer's opinions. The dwellings would still not appear cramped on site, notwithstanding the slight difference to the relationship between number 7 and plot 1, which was 0.5 compared to what was previously approved. In terms of neighbouring amenity, that's considered acceptable. The daylight and sunlight report was submitted, and that was deemed to show that there would not be an overbearing or loss of light issue to neighbouring properties, including from the kitchens, which were built higher than was previously approved. There would not be a loss of outlook. So overall, in terms of the conclusion, the scheme is considered to be visually acceptable with these revisions put forward, and the impact upon neighbouring residential amenity is also acceptable. In terms of recommendation to this, importantly, there has been a problem with delivering some of the letters to neighbours when the reconsultation was done. Some neighbours received letters, others did not receive them, so we've done a further reconsultation in terms of those that did not receive them. And that reconsultation period for those extra neighbours expires on the 22nd, which is obviously beyond the date of this committee. So what we're recommending is that we're given delegated authority to approve, subject to consideration of any comments received. If any new material issues are raised in those comments, then we would recommend that the application be returned to the committee for those comments to be reported to the committee. That's only if any new material issues are raised. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Could I now call on Simon Sorrell, a member of the public, to speak against? You have 3 minutes and the bell will go after 2. Thank you very much, Mr. Sorrell.
Good evening, Chair. Good evening, Committee. I understand that a founding principle of the planning system is that decisions should be taken in the public interest. Members are commended for having done just that on the past 2 meetings by deferring the decision. So what is the issue? You recognise that the houses were built higher than submitted drawings and gave clear instruction to the planning officers and developer to reduce the height to be compatible with houses on either side. That is in the public interest, and as members of the public, we need to see this has been achieved. Sadly, it has not. And here we are again to discuss another token proposal to reduce the ridge heights by only a fraction, leaving the most prominent roof, the gable of plot 3, untouched. For perspective, the proposal before you reduces the 7-metre buildings by only around the height of this A4 sheet of paper. They still have not been reduced to be consistent with that of neighbours. The officer's report claims that to do so would result in the pitch appearing alien and incongruous. Really? This is hard to believe. Surely it would be more incongruous if houses remained higher than adjacent buildings. Committee decided that reduction is required to limit damage to the street scene. Remarkably, your officers have again ignored your instructions in recommending only a partial solution. The key fact is that planning permission was granted on the basis of misleading drawings. Whether there was a deliberate attempt to deceive or an error in the artistic impression, the result was the same. It convinced the public and committee that the ridge heights matched those of neighbouring properties. We were deceived. You know it, the planning officers know it, and so does the public. The developer's supporting statement does at last confirm roof replacement is technically possible, but claims it is not financially viable. Let's be clear, this is a self-imposed problem caused by the developer continuing to build when there was a known issue with submitted plans. Council enforcement advised this was at the developer's risk, and this was acknowledged by their agent to yourselves at a previous meeting. So, how can you now be asked to favour the developer's bank balance at the expense of the street scene and public interest? If the decision is genuinely to consider the public interest, please do not base it on the developer's profit, but do the right thing and instruct that the house's height is fully and properly reduced. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now call on Mr. Pomeroy. Thank you. Same, you have 3 minutes and the bell will go after 2. Thank you.
Good evening, members. I believe that it would be helpful for me to restate the applicant's position in this matter. The 3 houses that have been built are no taller than they were originally approved. In this respect, I don't believe that enforcement action would lead to a reduction in their height. I believe that in the addendum statement, I advise that the built scheme is entirely lawful. I should qualify this by saying that it is lawful in respect of what appears to be the main issue, that being the height of the 3 houses. I accept that the rear single-storey kitchen projections are taller than approved. However, the additional height here has not led to any objections, and there is no material loss or impact on amenity of any kind. Your officers agree that the height of the dwellings are as they were approved. The issue has always been that the original street scene drawing submitted was incorrect. The applicants have simply applied to regularise this error, and in doing so, have found themselves being asked to reduce the height of all 3 houses rather than receive approval for the corrected plan. This seems to me to be totally disproportionate, and I wonder if the issues have become a little blurred as this saga has evolved. Some local residents opposed the development from the outset. They clearly expressed that view, yet the development was approved by this committee. Since then, residents have not collectively sought alterations to the built scheme. Some now describe the proposed changes as a bodge job and feel that the reduced height will not be in keeping with the wider neighbourhood. At the last meeting, the committee asked for the 3 houses to be reduced in height. The applicants have provided plans to illustrate how this could be achieved. Reducing the height of the houses is, in the applicant's view, unnecessary, as they are as approved and result in no material harm or any planning harm to which your officers concur. The applicants respectfully request that the need for this reduction is carefully reconsidered by the committee, as they believe it is not justified in planning terms and not widely supported by local residents. The applicants have submitted 3 proposals: a revised street scene plan, the original scheme, alteration of the height of one of the houses, and now alteration of all 3. Members can approve any one of these proposals. If the committee collectively and firmly believe that the alterations are indeed necessary, then there are 2 proposals on the table that can achieve that outcome, and as requested. In the applicant's view, however, no changes would be the preferred option, as the alteration proposed do not rectify any injury on neighbouring residents or the street scene. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Plummery. We now have a statement from Councillor Roger Buston, which I will ask Robert to read out to us.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies for the delay there. Mr. Chairman, committee, apology. My apologies to you and to residents for not being able to be with you this evening, as I have to attend the funeral of an old army chum in Salisbury, and as I am also an executor, will likely be there for some days. The application. Both members and officers, as well as the residents I am instructed to represent, are sadly all too familiar with this case and this site. I have been asked as ward councillor yet again by what seems like the residents of the whole area yet again over the last 2 to 3 years, following serial applications in both Marlow Way and Colvin Close involving the former